Our next guest is the former WBO junior welterweight champion and top welterweight contender. He's also a former ISKA world champion kickboxer at welter and super welterweight. In addition to that, he holds a bachelor's degree in healthcare science and has a master's degree in clinical nutrition. Please welcome to our latest edition of Title Unboxed, Chris Algieri.
Welcome to Title Unboxed. With more than 40 years of experience in the fight game, our host, Doug Ward, will be covering every corner of the ring as we get comfortable between the ropes. We'll talk with both the lesser knowns and the legends, discuss boxing's rich history and current state of the game. We'll also look at today's latest innovations, equipment breakdowns, and insights you won't uncover anywhere else. Join us now as we take a look inside Title Unboxed.
All right, Chris, it's good to see you.
Good to be here. My pleasure.
How it looks like you're staying busy during this chaotic time. How you holding up?
Yeah, I've been blessed to stay busy in all this and been able to pretty much continue with everything except for my own fight career. But really, I mean, it is what it is. This is 2020. Nothing is planned. Nothing is promised. So just making do.
Well, and luckily you're associated with Top Rank, who are one of the few promoters that have been able to keep up some semblance of fight shows up and going throughout this, at least on the tail end of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Bob Arum and Top Rank, they've really set the tone in the pandemic, as they have throughout their entire career through the life of modern boxing. They've always been kind of the forefront of how to promote and put on shows and build fighters. So. Yeah. It's no surprise that they're the first ones to roll out boxing programming for, post-pandemic.
You're right. And doing a great job. The shows are completely entertaining and competitive, which I love.
Yeah, it's almost like a resurgence of the Friday nights of old from the ESPN days where, it wasn't just blowout fights and setup fights. It was actual fights. And we're seeing a lot of that now, which is awesome.
Right. It's great. Well, I want to start with, we've got a lot of topics to cover. You've got a broad base in this sport, so we've got a lot of things to discuss. But I do want to start because I always find it fascinating how fighters get into this game. And you kind of, I don't want to say backed into it, but you took a completely different route into coming into professional boxing than most other guys. Whereas you didn't have an amateur career in boxing, but you're very successful as an amateur kickboxer and a professional boxer. I think you went undefeated in the pros, right?
Yes, I was 20-0 in kickboxing as well, leading into
That's awesome.
Pro kickboxing before going, into boxing.
Right. So you really got started in martial arts about what, 8, 9, 10 years old?
About there. Yeah, sounds about right.
And you had a little bit of a wrestling background and all that.
That was my first competitive sport because as a martial artist, there wasn't a whole lot of competitions, especially for what I like to do, which is more full contact. I was a teen or a preteen really, but I liked contact. I liked when we sparred full contact. I didn't want to go into point sparring competitions. So for me, wrestling was the closest thing to me being able to utilize my martial arts in an organized sport, especially in a school setting. And it turned out that I was pretty good.
So at what point in your professional career did you decide, okay, I want to, first of all, what kind of transition did you have to make what kind of technical transition did you have to make between kickboxing and then parlaying that into a boxing career? I would assume there were some adjustments in range, in balance, how you carry your weight. What kind of things did you encounter in making that transition from professional kickboxing to pro boxing?
Absolutely. I mean, there was a big transitionary period, and honestly, I think it was, a good probably third of my career, especially coming up, was that transition because I really learned on the job. I had my last kickboxing fight, I believe it was November of 2006, and I was in the pro ranks of boxing by April. Within 6 months, I went from my last kickboxing fight to my first pro fight. And the way I looked at it, it's like I've been fighting without a headgear for 6 years now. I don't want to go to the amateurs. I don't have any idea of not making money to fight. I've been a world champion 2 times in this sport. And for me to transition to boxing, I knew there was going to be a learning curve. Sure. But honestly, even my kickboxing style was much more boxing than, than say kicking or some of the other combat sports and transitionary sports like Taekwondo or Thai boxing or anything like that. I was always much better with my hands. Majority of my knockouts and stoppages in kickboxing were from my hands anyway. And anytime I ever got in trouble in a kickboxing fight, which happened many times, it was my hands that got me out. It wasn't my kicks,
Yeah.
you know? So for me,
Yeah,
I always
right.
kind of consider myself much more of a boxer than a kickboxer. And honestly, you know, especially towards the end of my kickboxing career, my sparring, I wasn't even sparring kickboxing because one, I
Oh,
mean, there
really?
wasn't a lot of high level kickboxers on Long Island or
Hmm.
in New York. And I was fighting literally guys from all over the world and traveling quite a bit. So in this country, kickboxing wasn't very strong, especially at this time in the, you know, early 2000s. So for me, I was going to Gleason's gym. I was going to Jersey. I was going to Brooklyn. I was going to New York City to spar with boxers. And
Right.
more than a few occasions, their coaches were like, man, you got a lot of boxer in you. There were times I was sparring these guys
Yeah.
barefoot because that's how we kickboxed, and they, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I'm sure I got a lot of weird looks and people talking about whatever. But at the end of the day, the proof is in the pudding that I can box, I can punch. So
Yeah.
I earned their respect pretty quick in that sense.
Yeah. It's funny you bring up ESPN fights because I remember back in college, when I was in college, the ESPN Friday night fights, they alternated. So one week it was boxing, the next week it was kickboxing. And it was a strong sport back then. You had Bob Thunder Thurman, you had Bill Superfoot Wallace. You know, it's funny that
Yep.
that sport has not taken the same trajectory as boxing and MMA.
Yeah, I agree. I watched a lot of it on TV, and that's kind of how I first got into it. And even a little more contemporary than the guys you've been, like Johnny Terrio from
Yeah.
Canada. There's so many great Canadian kickboxers. And then even in the States, we had guys like, you know, like Tim Lane and Derek Panza. Those are guys that I was
Yeah.
around who are more of the American style fighters. And then like, you know, Duke Rufus and all those guys who are
Yeah.
complete stars, especially internationally. So for me, watching those guys coming up, that's kind of where I fell in love with, you know, combat kickboxing, combat sports in that
Right.
sense, away from boxing. Cause that was always my first love. That's the first sport I ever remember watching was boxing. And like you said,
Right.
those ESPN shows, there was Tuesday night fights, Wednesday night
Oh
fights,
yeah.
Friday night fights, and they always changed, you know, where they on. Even I remember USA boxing had fights. I think it was on Wednesday nights. Maybe
Uh-huh.
it was
Yep.
USA boxing. That was way
Uh-huh.
back. So literally, it's the first sport I remember watching. You know,
Right.
for me, you know, boxing was number one.
So you had a love for it already, so that made that transition and that leap obvious for you, right?
Oh yeah, and even for me, considering my kickboxing, it's just because of where I started. If I had started in a place where I could have gotten into a boxing gym, boxing would have been my first end all and be all.
Hmm.
For me, even with my kickboxing, I love kickboxing, I always did, but there was just a different feeling in my mind and my heart when it came to boxing. It was always a way for me to get to that. And I remember bringing it
Right.
up to, you know, people in my dojo and my gym, and you know, kind of giving them the pipe dream of what I wanted to do. And everybody was like, that's a really hard road. A lot of guys have tried it. It doesn't really ever work out.
Yeah.
So I had a lot of naysayers, even the people very close to me. But honestly, you weren't telling me I wasn't doing it. You know, you weren't telling me I
Right.
wasn't going to at least try. So
Well, and you had a fast start, a fantastic start. You went like 19-0 before the
yeah,
Povetkin fight.
yeah. I mean, I think if a lot of the young guys, I think if they were to look at my record coming up, you know,
Yeah.
they might see something a little different than a lot of the other guys out there. You know, I had tough fights early,
Yep.
and
Yeah.
I had a lot of prospect versus prospect fights early on, which maybe people don't really remember. I was always clamoring to be on TV. Like, I mean, I was always selling out tickets because I was selling out shows because I was popular on Long Island. Long Island was boxing was starting to kind of surge at that time.
Sure.
So for me, if you're the main event in your second pro fight, you can't really fight bums. So I end up fighting, you know, a lot of pretty tough guys, you know, pretty early on. You know, when you're selling out the room and you're the fight at the end of the night, you know, they don't want to see a 30-second blowout against a cab driver. So I
Right.
think I got a lot of tougher fights that way. But also just in terms of matchmakers and promoters asking me like, hey, what about this guy? I was always like, yeah, okay, whoever, yeah, I want to be a world champion. Like it doesn't, you know, matchmaking is an art form, but I didn't know. I didn't get that then. You know, I was just like,
Right.
I want to fight.
Sure.
I'm gonna win. I'll figure it out. And I think that really helped me because, like you said, you know, in my ninth, you know, I was 19-0 and I was getting a shot at a world title fight. You know, that's fast for guys with tons of amateur fights, let alone someone
Yeah.
that literally was my 20th boxing fight ever. To be in there with high level guys like that, with Freddie Roach across
Right.
the way. So for me, I think
Right.
a lot of those tough fights I had early on set me up to be able to make, you know, have those big wins in those big fights.
When you were probably able to get some of those tougher fights against some more veteran guys with good experience and good records because of your kickboxing background. I think some people probably discounted that. So like, yeah, I'll fight him. And little did they know, like you say, you were primarily a work with your hands guy anyway. So
Absolutely. And I think the thing that probably helped me the most was the defense, because understanding I had been fighting that I've had 47 pro fights without a headgear, you know, and that's that when you add that up from the kickboxing, just that alone, you know, when you put on those small gloves, you take that headgear off, it's a different world. I don't care what sport you're doing. If there's punches and kicks flying at your head, being able to defend and being aware and being able to pull the trigger in those very dangerous situations, I think helped me a lot early on in my career dealing with you know, defense and not taking damage on the way up.
Sure. And once you're getting used to getting hit by kicks, you do everything you can to not get connected against, you know.
I don't miss getting kicked. I'll tell you that much.
So the Povetkin fight happened in 2014, and that really thrust you into the spotlight in a big way. I think it was on boxing. Was it on HBO Boxing After Dark?
Yeah, it was Provatnikov, Ruslan Provatnikov. It was ESPN Boxing After Dark. Yes, and it was at the Barclays Center. It was one of the first shows they had there.
What do you remember about that fight? Because my recollection, it was a knockdown, drag-out fight. I mean, you were down a couple times. One of your eyes was swollen. Was it your right eye?
My right eye, yes.
Right eye, almost swollen shut, right?
Yeah, pretty much shut.
Yeah. So what do you remember about that fight, about overcoming adversity, being in the spotlight, that kind of spotlight for the first time? What are your recollections looking back? I know it's been a while ago, but you have to have
honestly, I remember it like it was yesterday.
Really?
I remember it like it was yesterday, honestly. I remember almost every round. I remember a lot of the feelings, a lot of the emotions, a lot of what was going on. I'm pretty good like that for most of my fights. I remember them pretty detailed, honestly. Because you're so dialed in, you know, for the night and for that moment. So for me, especially with that fight, I was dialed in. I was not losing that night. There was nothing in my mind that we weren't leaving that ring without the belt. So for me, we had a great game plan, something I really believed in. I had been watching Ruslan for years, especially on, again, ESPN comes up again. I've been watching him on Friday night fights, crushing people. I remember watching him, and man, I would hate to be in a ring with that guy. And of course, my first big fight is that guy.
Right.
You know, because he's a monster. You know, he was super strong, very, very durable. You know, again, Freddie Roach is in his corner. High level fights, was coming off a fight of the year, had just destroyed Mike Alvarado in his hometown to win the world title, you know, and that's another thing. It's like, I was fighting the defending champion. I didn't win a vacant title. I fought the guy. And especially at that time, and that around that time, he was the boogeyman. So going into that fight, you know, initially I think it was like 15-1, and you know, people were saying I was going to get blown out. Freddie kept telling everybody I was getting knocked out in one round. And he was almost right. You know, I made a mistake early. It was funny. I remember because our game plan was to box smart early on, avoid the big shots, keep touching him, keep moving him, make him miss, get his timing, get his rhythm. And then, you know, he was a big bruncher than me, but I still thought I could stop him. I knew I could hurt him. And the idea was, I thought it was going to be the left hook. So I had the idea, like, all right, he's a big puncher. He's a face first kind of guy. I'm going to have him run into my left hook. We'll trade left hooks. He'll knock himself out. That was the idea. Tire him out, break him down, get him to be a little bit slower, get my timing and rhythm. And then, all right, when he goes to throw that big left hook, because I know he does, I'm going to get there first. I'm going to get there faster. I'm going to do it in a way that I'm defensively minded, and we can get him to hurt himself. And I got greedy. First round, I remember I threw this uppercut. I threw a wild uppercut, and I hit him right on his chin. Boom! And I was like, man, this guy's actually kind of easy to hit. And I threw a couple of the combinations, and I'm landing, and I'm like, all right, I'm going to skip 6 or 7 or 8 rounds. And I'm going to go right to the left hook now. I went to trade left hooks with him, and I got there first, but I wasn't defensively minded. He was still quick and explosive at that time. And I got hit with a left hook, and it was weird. It hit me in a strange spot, kind of like in the corner of my eye and my nose. Broke my orbital in 3 places, broke my nose in 2 places.
Oh, wow.
And shut pretty much immediately. By the time I got up off the canvas, and honestly, I got hit, I went down, and I got right up. By the time I got up, my eye was halfway shut. And by the end of the round, it was pretty much shut. My nose was all over the place. And I took my 8 count. And I had been down before in kickboxing, so it wasn't the first time for me dealing with a standing 8 count. I knew how it worked. Sure. I knew how to take my time. I knew how to respond to the ref in a way that they knew you were still in the fight. And so I took my time, but I also couldn't see out of either eye at that time. I was still, this eye was really damaged, obviously, and literally half of my face went numb because of the bones that were fractured.
Oh, really?
And but also, like, my other eye was really blurry and hazy as well. So when they resumed the action and Ruslan was coming at me, I just saw a body. I couldn't see his hands. I couldn't see his gloves. I just saw flashes and punch. So I took a knee. I'm like, I can't defend myself here. I'm going to take a knee. Hopefully that other 8 count will give me the time for my eyesight to come back. And it did, thank God. So by the time I took a couple counts while I was on my knee, I finally could see the ref and I was like, oh, okay, we're back in business. And and then pretty much, from then on, I just went to work, went back to the game plan, fought smart, and just tried to defend that eye best I could.
Yeah. Well, it worked, and it caught the attention of Pacquiao's people, obviously. That was your next fight. I mean, talk about 2 tough fights back to back.
Yeah. And especially in terms of coming off such a damaging fight, it was that eye needed a lot of time. So we were really cutting it down in terms of how we were going to set up sparring and training camp. The fight was less than 6 months later because we fought, it was June, and then we fought in November. So it was a tight time frame to heal, train, but also do the press tour that we were doing. But we did the best we could. It was an opportunity of a lifetime, and I wasn't going to say no. I got an opportunity to fight a living legend. So,
but you hit it, a living legend. He's a little bit of a different animal, right?
I'm sorry. One more time.
You said it. He's a living legend, but he's a little bit of a different animal, right? I mean, his punches are a little different, and he's awkward. He's difficult to fight.
Everything about him's different. I mean, the speed, the power, kind of, the southpaw, we're fighting in China, it's Manny Pacquiao, but like, I've become such a fan of him over the years, especially since that night, and just to see what he's continued to be able to do. He's a freak of nature. The guy's 42 years old. He's still beating undefeated world champions in his 8th weight class or whatever weight class that he's in. Right. But yeah, to have someone so physically gifted, but also smart in the ring. That was something. I mean, he is a living legend. He is what he is. And, Manny Pacquiao I tip my hat to that guy forever, because he is a phenomenal athlete.
But you learn, even though it's adversity, you learn a lot from that, right? I mean, you learned a lot from that Pacquiao fight, and you came out a better fighter from it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I learned a lot about the sport of boxing. I'll tell you that much. I learned a lot about the business side of boxing. I learned a lot about everything that goes on behind the scenes, because when we were there, literally, I'm still with my coaches, my kickboxing coaches. So like, this is all our first time. And I managed myself at that time. I didn't have a manager. I negotiated myself, and, really? I didn't have the protection of the experience that like a lot of guys would have had or could have had. And looking back, it is what it is. I could always say, oh, I wish I had a big time manager, but it is what it is. But yeah, no, I learned and came right back, and I got for a fight with Amir Khan, who was another star at the time. And I didn't blink. I wanted that fight. That was a great fight. And I thought I had a lot to prove after the Pacquiao fight. So, we went right from talk about tough fight to tough fight to tough fight. We went right to it,
Well, and I think even your critics, because we all have them, but I think they even said, you look like a much improved fighter from the Pacquiao fight to the Khan fight.
Absolutely. And I think just training for world title fights in general, going through the training camps makes you a better fighter. Everything's heightened. There's so much more attention. There's so much more focus. So for me, it was just another fight that I had a real camp under my belt, getting prepared for a 12-rounder. And yeah, when there's such a steep learning curve for me because of my lack of boxing experience, that you could really see the jumps and improvements as my career went on.
And improvements, like you say, in training camp, in the way you approach a fight, in the media, the hypes around it. It's a little bit of everything, correct?
Absolutely. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't understand, what it's like to be that level of fighter in terms of the media attention, the effect on your social life, the effect on your familiar life, the effect on just traveling around and all the obligations that you incur when you're a world champion or you're on the world stage. When you have that many eyes tuned in, there's a tremendous pressure, and you're under the microscope as well. So it's a very different world. 3 fights earlier, I was fighting in my hometown, in dark fights, to go from that, to a 7-city world tour to, main event on pay-per-view to, you're fighting Spike TV and fighting, fighting gold medalists and world champions. It's a transition that you're never prepared for, but you got to make do. And that's part of the sport.
Yeah. It's just learning and adapting quickly. So during the Povetkin fight, Povetkin, right? Yeah. And then also the Pacquiao fight, you were down several times in both fights. And this gets to a point, I think, how much of that ability to get up, keep fighting, remain focused is based in your conditioning and also your preparation, nutrition. How much does all that play in your ability to respond, to bounce back, and to stay in the game?
I think first, I think that comes to mind is conditioning. It's like, all right, this guy keeps getting up. It takes a lot out of you to get dropped, to get knocked down, to get wrung. Even when you get hit with a shot and you don't go down, and it affects your equilibrium, or you get that shock through your bottom, or you see that white flash. It affects you at a neurological central nervous system type level, and that can be very exhausting. The stress alone can really zap your energy tanks, your energy reserves. So it's important to be in fantastic shape. It's important to be able to dig deep during camp, during your sparring sessions, during your strength conditioning sessions, during your runs, during your conditioning sessions, to understand that, one, if it does happen, I'm ready, and two, that you have that experience already. You're at that point, your body's in survival mode, and when you've been there at like the cellular level in terms of what's going on, it makes it a lot easier to be psychologically strong during that. And I think that's a major part of it too. Having the mindset that, like I said in the Povetkin fight, like, I'm not leaving this ring without the win. With the Pacquiao fight, there was so much talk about, him knocking me out, and Freddie was saying it every chance, and he said it with the Povetkin fight too. I'm like, man, I'm not getting knocked out. Like, you're going to have to do a lot to me, for that to happen. So having that mindset going in, is really important. I think you see that in fights too, when guys just refuse to bend, or to go down, or stay down, or not win, or not, the will is something that is on display in every championship fight.
Right. Well, and aside from your heart, people have always given you credit for being in top physical condition, be able to fight the entire fight at the same pace. How do you go about that? How much of a role does nutrition play in that?
Yeah. So that, honestly, that was by design. My style, my training approach was always to be in better shape, not to be outworked, because, like I said, I was a late start to this sport in particular. So for me, I didn't have those 200 amateur fights, those 300 amateur fights. I'm not part of that amateur boxing fraternity that you see. All these guys all fought as amateurs and as they were kids. I don't have that experience. So for me, it was just like, I have to be a better athlete. Most boxers, especially guys who've been boxing their whole lives, they're not used to systematic approaches to training for sport. They're not used to being on a team. They're not used to strength conditioning programs, diet, nutrition. Most boxers, it's very old school and somewhat antiquated when it comes to the training and conditioning leading up to it. So for me, I saw a window to be able to step up in terms of my experience, or my lack thereof, to kind of bridge that gap. And I did that by being in better condition, training harder, training smarter, using more sports science to my approach of training, having proper nutrition that's dialed in so I can make the weight, be bigger, faster, and better fueled on fight night. And that was a huge part, I think, for me, especially coming up. The weigh-in, like, I wasn't struggling to make the weight. I was doing it smart. I was properly fueled, like you said, not getting tired, keeping the same pace. A lot of that has to do with the fuel you're putting in your body, the way that your body's prepared to perform. So, for me, that was a big part of why I went to school for what I did and studied nutrition, got my master's degree in nutrition, became a certified sports nutritionist, and was able to not only apply it to myself as an athlete, but also to use myself as a guinea pig to figure out what worked best for an athlete in the sport that I'm doing, but also what worked best for me individually. So I think that really did give me a leg up in terms of where I was able to go in the sport at the speed at which I did it.
Right. Well, and I really want to get into the nutrition aspect, because you're a guy who has made a life outside of boxing through your background in health and nutrition. And that started early on, right? I mean, your love and your kind of interest in the science behind the sport, maybe through wrestling or kickboxing career. I mean, you tell me.
It was wrestling. Like you said, I'd wrestled in high school, and one thing about high school wrestling is there's very little to no kind of nutrition knowledge about making weight and cutting weight, and it's brutal. I was miserable about 3 out of my 4 years of high school just because I was always concentrating on making weight. And I remember my senior year, I won, my counties, which is why I went to Catholic school. So I won my Catholic state, and which allowed me to go to the public states. And New York State is a good wrestling state. And I remember going up there, and I won my first 2 matches day one. And then day two, these guys put on so much weight, and they were so much bigger and stronger. And I was like, what is this? Like, I'm only a couple pounds heavier from yesterday. And like, there was a disconnect. And I was like, oh man, I'm missing something. And I realized that also I was just struggling to make the weight, and it was affecting my performance. So I said, all right, if food can affect me negatively, well, I got to figure out how it can affect me positively. Mm-hmm. And that's really where I really dove into the science of nutrition and sports performance. And literally, I've always been a good reader. So I was going to libraries and taking out books and reading as much as I could on sport and nutrition and everything. I knew that boxing and kickboxing endurance was an important thing. So I read a lot of books on endurance training and for sport, triathlon training, long distance running, those kind of things. And then started learning about power sports. And my library in college of the books that I chose to read on my own was pretty vast. And it gave me a lot of different looks on sport performance and sports nutrition. And then couple that with the fact that I just love food. My mother's from Argentina. My father's Italian. Got 2 cultures where food, where the culture centered around food. Sure. It just made it that much more important to me to understand what I'm putting in my body.
Yeah. And the whole approach is brutal and somewhat unhealthy, right? I mean, the way fighters now they're so geared towards dropping down a weight class. We're kind of at the point where I feel like we're at a tipping point where it's becoming a little bit more obvious that this is not good long-term for the fighter.
Yes. I think a lot of athletes, just like I had learned in high school, are damaging their performance, let alone damaging their bodies in order to prepare and make the weight. And guys, we talk about the first fight is the scale. And it's just, that's a tough mentality to have. You're going into a fight in one of the most dangerous activities you could ever do. You shouldn't be fighting the day before, in terms of make weight or make the scale. Because it's not a lot of time between the weigh-in and the fight. You got looking at 24 to 28 hours, depending on where you fight in the card. It's not a lot of time to refuel your body, rehydrate your brain, especially if you're not doing it in a systematic way, especially if you don't have people around you who know how to do it the right way. So I agree. I feel like there's more knowledge coming in about this. There's some other organizations, like One Championship is an MMA. I think they're in Singapore. Don't quote me on that, but they've gotten away with like traditional weight cuts, and they're doing, they're checking their hydration status, and they're allowing them to be heavier. I think it's a move in the right direction.
But if a fighter approaches his nutrition, his diet plan, for lack of a better word, correctly, it shouldn't be a struggle to make weight, right?
Well, yes, to a degree. But at the highest level, the elite level, guys are big. And guys do, the more money that's involved, the more willing a fighter is to put themselves through, the process of making the weight and cutting a lot of water weight out of their body and taking that and stepping on the scale and whatnot and rehydrating. there's a point of diminishing returns. And it's different for every guy. It's different in the way you approach. It's different in the age of the athlete. So you got to kind of figure that out with your team and have a systematic approach. But I know, for example, like I have a lot of young athletes reach out to me, amateur boxers, and they ask me about cutting weight. And I tell them all the time, don't at all. You don't need to. Be the best version of yourself. Skills pay the bills. You're looking at 3 rounds. You're looking at 4 rounds. Size is not going to make a difference. Having an extra 5 pounds on your opponent is not going to help you win the fight. Being better at being properly fueled, being physically strong, being mentally strong, because that's part of it too. When you're in a dehydrated or negative energy state, you're not feeling strong up here. That's nature. So I tell these young guys, these athletes, these amateurs, don't cut weight. Be better, be faster, be smarter. Be sharper. Work on your skills. Don't worry about making weight.
Yeah, it's tough because I think
the
amateurs. I mean, it's the amateurs. You get some losses. It's not a big deal. It's not going to affect your financial windfall later on down the line. But
that too.
Yeah, it always amazed me. I'd go to amateur tournaments and see kids bringing in sacks of McDonald's after weigh-ins. I was like, oh my God, sad. But but it really goes back to, coaches know how to teach a strength and conditioning guy knows how to teach somebody to do a push-up. They know how to teach them to throw the jab, but it's not common knowledge about how to fuel your body, how to feed your physical being. It's just not as readily available as those other more traditional, aspects of the sport are.
Yeah, 100%. And a lot of that has to do with our current food culture. It has to do with the marketing of certain products and diet plans and all these different 100%. Fads and all these things that are out there, which I think confuses and muddles the waters. If you're not knowledgeable on nutrition from the scientific aspect, it's very confusing. And even then it can be. So I understand why it's difficult, to properly prepare these athletes and these young guys to eat the right way. So yeah, it makes sense that it's difficult, but I think there's more people becoming aware of how much of a difference that it can make and are reaching out to professionals for help. Right.
Well, unfortunately, you kind of laid the blueprint now. I've been in this sport for 40 years and nobody's ever sat down and given a instruction guide or a game plan for a fighter's nutrition. And I've got your book here, The Fighter's Kitchen. How long has this been out now?
Just over a year. Year it's been out. It's been doing quite well.
And I got to tell you, it's fantastic. I mean, not only is it perfect for anybody that's just wanting to look the part of a fighter, to live that fighting lifestyle, but it's also perfect for fighters who really want something that's simple to apply to their game and that makes sense, that applies to, their overall approach.
Absolutely. And that was the game plan, was to really just lay out the fundamentals. So like you said, there's so little resource out there for fighters.
Yeah.
A lot of guys, I think, have a lot of trust issues with other sports. Like, well, it's not boxing, it's not fighting. It's not the same thing. Mm-hmm. And honestly, to a degree, yes, I agree. Because we are in a very unique sport. Compared to anything else. It's not like the traditional, big sports that we see in this country or internationally. Fight sports are different and has to be treated as such. So now we have the fundamentals, and this was kind of the idea, behind the Fighter's Kitchen, is to set the tone for the basis of what you need to know, basic knowledge, put it in an easy way that's easy to read, easy to do. I've had so many fighters reach out to me and say, making weight has become so much easier thanks to your book. The food is delicious. The recipes are great. I can do them. My wife or my girlfriend can do them. I will say this, that the response has been great from everyone who's reached out to me. And I thank everyone who's listening.
Right. Well, and that is key, is the simplicity of it, because most people just pick bad because it's easy and it's cheap. But the things you've laid out in this book are so simple. I mean, everything from the avocado toast recipe that has just a few nuances in it to, the beat down shake?
Beat down shake, one of my favorites.
They're so simple, and it's not weird ingredients. It's like, oh, I gotta go to the grocery store and get it. It's readily available things that make it so easy that if you don't follow something similar to this, you're being lazy.
Well, yeah, I get that all the time. People are like, I can't cook. I'm like, nah, that sounds like something lazy, because you can. And that's a big point of my cooking and what I've told people. Like, I'm not a chef. I'm not a chef. This is not a chef inspired book. I don't never say I'm a
Right.
chef. I've never, pretended to be a chef. I'm a fighter who studied nutrition and likes to eat good food. And honestly, a lot of the recipes that are in the book, I developed while in training camp, living in hotel rooms with hot plates and microwaves and small ovens and George Foreman grills. I used
Yeah.
to travel with those things all the time, so I can make
Yep.
my own food and save money.
Sure.
Like you said, they're not difficult. And anyone who says that they
Right.
can't cook, pick up the book, take a look in it. You'll realize that you can pretty much do everything in there.
Well, and that's what gives it all that much more credibility, is that you came out with this from the experience of having to apply some of these, or not having this kind of a easy game plan to apply.
And I think that's another thing too, is that the recipes are real. So like,
Yeah.
when it's 100, it seems like a lot. And I think when we first was even talking to the publisher, I'm like, man, that's a lot of recipes. And then I'm going through everything and I'm like, nah, I got a lot more than that
Yeah.
now that I think about
Yeah.
it, and kind of putting them all together and just try to mix it up. And I think if you've gone through the whole book, you can tell that I don't subscribe to any particular dietary
Right.
pattern. There's
Hmm.
keto meals in there. There's paleo meals. There's vegan meals. There's vegetarian meals. There's fish. There's meat.
Right.
There's beef. There's everything under the sun. And like you said, there's some little nuances that I put in there to kind of spice things up a bit. But for the most part, my recipes and my food has always been pretty basic and really just
Right.
covering what your body needs. Because at the end of the day, once you start understanding that food is fuel, it gives you a tremendous amount of power for what you're doing physically.
And you break it down in a very easy to read pattern too. You got some fun side stories, but you also don't tell what, you also tell why, proteins, and you break it down into, why this is good for you, why you need it. And I think that's very beneficial in simplistic, very layman terms.
Yeah, I think that's important too, because like I said about like fighters, a lot of them they're not very trustworthy of other sources and what's coming at them. But if you
Right.
have it written out just the way it is, this is what it is. This is how it feels your body. Here's the calories. Here's the macros. Here's the protein amount. It makes it a lot easier. Takes the guesswork out of it, because that's the way I think about it with fighting and training. So much of your time is dedicated to the hard work and the training volume,
Right.
and the nutrition is one of those things where it's like I don't want to think about it. I just want to kind of
Right.
open it up and just go to that.
Yeah.
Like we can't
Yeah.
afford our own chefs all in the beginning.
Right.
So
Right.
that's why something like this can be a good resource.
Yeah. Everybody can't have you come into training camp like Daniel Jacobs, right?
Yeah, right, exactly.
It'd be
I'm
nice,
Boy
but
Danny.
so I do want to give them a little taste of what we talked about here in the book, but let's break it down into like three phases of fight camp. There's the
Mhm.
there's the during training, what you should be focused on eating. There's the fight week, what you should be focused on eating. And I think the biggest one that people just seem lost or all over the board on is after weigh-ins, what do I eat to be prepared for a fight? So is it difficult to break it down into those three categories, or is that a stretch?
No. We can talk about that. And we can make that make sense. So during training, so I think you'll agree with me that the bulk of the movements in boxing are explosive, speed,
Right.
explosive power. But there is the idea that essentially it is an endurance sport with power movements in between. I always kind of likened it to like a midfielder in soccer, where you're moving the whole time, but you have sprints and explosions, or a tennis player where the match is very, very long, but all of the movements are very explosive. Whether you're serving, returning, whatever. Boxing is that way, where you have to be able to move for 12 rounds, and 12 rounds is a very long time for any
Yep.
kind of sport, especially with the intensity and explosiveness that is involved with all boxing maneuvers. Even moving your head is very explosive. Everything is
Right.
very
Hmm.
intense. So your main energy source during those explosive movements is going to be carbohydrates. So I see a lot of people who are like, "Wow, I'm going to use keto to make weight." Cool, you're going to make weight, but you're not going to be able to train or fight. You're not going to
Hmm.
have that explosive tank that you need, for all those movements and all those training and that training volume. So,
Yep.
during camp, you got to focus on having carbs around your training sessions. And protein is going to be very important because of the muscle damage that's going to be happening during training, whether you're doing resistance training or just from getting hit and punching. There's a tremendous amount of tissue damage from punching things and getting punched and get blocking and whatnot, and just regular training, right? So you need to have those amino acids in there to rebuild the muscle that we're working. looking for the healthy fats is going to be important for making sure that we're keeping our inflammation under control. So during training camp, you got to eat to perform. So pretty much everything you need to eat more. You need to eat, you need to be varied. So I always preach about a balanced and varied intake. So making sure you eat lots of fruits, colorful fruits and vegetables. So you're getting those antioxidants, micronutrients, so your body can heal and recover from the intense training sessions. Getting plenty of protein so you can rebuild those muscles, build muscle. Carbohydrates to fuel the workouts and to recover from the workouts. And then your healthy fat so you can use that as an energy source throughout the rest of the day, but also for your recovery, and also making sure that your joints and your body is healing properly and you're keeping your blood flowing as well. So during camp, there's a little more leeway because the training volume is so high. And for the guys who are trying to cut down or get lean, I would say that if you focused your carbohydrates around your more intense exercise, your more explosive, faster, or even your longer duration work, and kind of focus your carbohydrates around there before and after, then it'll be easier for you to cut those carbs later in the day as you get closer to bedtime. And a lot of times that can help lower your body fat, get your body composition where it needs to be coming to fight time. Because a fighter has to think of their body as a high performance vehicle. You want to be low in weight and high in horsepower, right? So we don't need any extra body fat. Most boxers are very, very lean, especially at the highest level, because they don't need that excess. And they want to have a lot of lean tissue, a lot of muscle, a lot of horsepower, a lot of explosiveness, a lot of speed, a lot of strength, a lot of power. So when you think about it like that, getting yourself leaner, getting up to fight time or weigh-in time is going to help you, like you said, so you don't have to struggle as much come fight time.
You break that down really well in the book. Where's the best place to find the macronutrients? What are some of the best things protein sources? What are the best carbohydrate sources? And again, you break it down very easily, which some people, you say carbs and they're like, well, what is that? Is that pasta?
Yeah, right. Or is that, or they don't realize that like fruit juice has carbs, or juice has carbs, or, but it's a whole wheat wrap. So it doesn't have carbs. No, it does have carbs. And that is an energy source. It might be a better choice, a more complex version of it, but there's still carbs in there. Oatmeal is, is carbohydrates. Even though we think of oatmeal as a health food, it is. But you got to understand that that is a carbohydrate dense food and should be around when you're sparring or doing a high intensity workout.
So I think we hit on everything except the weigh-in. After the weigh-ins, okay, I've weighed in. I've got the buffet at Caesar's Palace sitting in front of me. What do I pick? What do I eat?
Depending on how tough your weight cut is, so that week of the weigh-in, I always tell like that fight week is not only making weight week, but it's also recovery week. Training camp is hard. You put your body through a whole lot. Your training volume is going to go way down fight week. You're going to try and recover so you're feeling as fresh and as healed as you can going into fight night. So that week, the training volume is going to go down. So your carb intake is going to probably go down quite a bit too. You don't need a whole bunch of carbs that day, especially if you're trying to pull some extra water and some extra pounds off your body. So depending on how much water you had to apply to your body for the weigh-in, your post-weigh-in, it's going to be still going to be important because you're basically fueling for the night, but also you got to think about how much I got to recover from my weight cut and weight making.
Right.
And that's where I mean, like, depending on how difficult that cut was, is how much you really need to focus and dial in that nutrition right after. So I remember what I said, carbohydrates are the name of the game when it comes to anything explosive. A boxing match is going to be very, very explosive. So carbs are your friends from the time you weigh in until pretty much the night you fight. You're not going to have a big need for protein. You're not going to have a big need for fats at that time. So it's going to be a lot of carbohydrates. Notice what I said, not going to need a lot of fat. I think that's where people mess up the most is they go to the McDonald's and they get that greasy bag. All that grease is fat. Those French fries and that burger that's literally dripping through the bag, that's a lot of fat. And it's going to really affect. That's going to affect how your body digests the other food that you put in. It's going to slow you down. It's going to make you feel sluggish. And gaining more weight does not mean you're better. Being bigger doesn't mean you're better. Being properly fueled means you're going to be better and more prepared for fight night. So your main source of fuel, again, is going to be your carbohydrates. So really focus on those good, healthy, complex carbs going into fight day. Make sure your hydrating is really important because, listen, our blood is made of mostly water. Our muscles are made of mostly water. And the thing that protects our brain, our cerebral spinal fluid, is fluid. Yep. And we get punched in our head. So we want to make sure that we are hydrated up here. So that's really, really important to make sure that you're getting your fluid and your electrolytes right post weigh-in, making sure that you're holding on to the water that you put in.
Well, and you hit on something that, bigger isn't necessarily better. I think a lot of guys focus on how much volume can I put in my body after I weigh in. So, are there other mistakes or misconceptions about diet and performance that are similar to that people should just like, better if you avoid this?
Yeah, I think the three that really stand out for me when it comes to fight camp nutrition, like the major pitfalls. One is guys cutting their carbs too early during their training camp in order to try and make weight. So you're taking away from your training performance in order to make the weight. Fighting is about winning, not about making weight. So you have to make weight, but you got to be able to perform, be prepared. So cutting your carbs too early is, I think, is silly and is going to be really counterintuitive to your training. Cutting your water too soon. I've seen guys who are still sparring and they're worried about how much water they're drinking because how it's going to affect the scale. Water is very transient. It comes in and out of our body very quick and very easily. So I would not worry about limiting or withholding water from your body until at least maybe a couple days prior to the weigh-in, if at all. So that's really important because, again, like I said, that cerebral spinal fluid, what protects your brain, is fluid. So we want to make sure that our body stays very, very hydrated leading up to the fight. And then the third one is, which we touched on first, was gaining more weight is not necessarily getting it better for you. Going and eating pizza after the weigh-in because it packs on the pounds because it's got tons of sodium and fat doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be a better fighter. I like to always use the example of Floyd Mayweather versus Canelo Alvarez. When they fought, I believe Canelo had a 15 or 16 pound functional weight advantage going into the ring. Didn't matter. Skills paid the bills. The older, smaller, smarter, faster fighter was able to win handily. And Canelo is one of the best fighters in the world. So there's a perfect example of why size doesn't matter as much as you might think.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's great. Everybody should go out and buy that book. I'm not here to endorse stuff, but I have to because I read that and I was blown away by the content and just how well the book was put together and how much it applies, again, not just to those who want to be in fighting shape, but those who really need to be in fighting shape, the competitive athletes. So where do people go to buy the book? Where's the best place?
Yes, Amazon.com is probably the best spot. It's The Fighter's Kitchen. You can just Google it. I think Barnes & Nobles has it. It might be even available at Target still these days. But yeah, check it out on Amazon. Pick it up. I appreciate it. It's not. I don't say it's good just because it's mine. I think it's actually pretty good, like you said.
No, it's a good read and it's great for the fight game. Really is good. Again, it fills a void that's been there as long as I've ever been in the game. So thank you for that. Before we wrap up here, we got to hit on your boxing plans. I don't think you're done fighting yet. What do you have laid out? Anything, or are you in the same limbo as everybody else is right now?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a limbo going on. Part of it is, for one hand, I want fans. I like the rush of the crowd. I like that feeling going into the ring. I like that tunnel feeling, that tunnel vision. It's something that, like I said, I've been selling out crowds my whole career, even from the start. Right. So my fan base and the crowds and the energy has always been really important to me. So I've been having trouble wrapping my head around the idea of fighting in a bubble and not having people around. So I think we're close, though. I think we're close to having some people. So we're gonna try and hang out at least a little bit longer until we can get the crowds going.
Yeah, the guys I've talked to, it has been across the board. They're either like, well, once the fight starts, I'm in fight mode anyway. The crowd's gone. But there are others that are like, yeah, it's a little weird. It's a little hard to get up for and to not get that constant feedback throughout the fight and know that your people are right there. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I said, that's part of the reason I think a lot of the high end guys do it, is that rush. And it's, again, this sport's very dangerous. I don't have to fight. I love to fight. And that's a major part of it for me. So, having those crowds is important.
Yeah. Well, regardless, you've given boxing fans some great moments of action, plus the book. I don't know that anybody could provide more from their career than you have. It's great stuff.
Thank you. I got more to come too. I got more good things up my sleeves.
We'll be watching. So Chris, before we wrap up, tell everybody how they can connect with you on social, what your social channels are, and how to stay in contact and watch what you're doing and keep updated on your career.
Yeah, the easiest way is just go to chrisalgieri.com. But my Instagram is probably where I'm most active, and that's just Chris_Algieri. Generally, if you can spell my name, you can find me. And yeah, I appreciate the time, and I look forward to what's next.
Well, this has been a pleasure and very informative. Thank you for that. Hopefully next time we meet, maybe it'll be in person and you can do a little cooking demo for us and the fight fans out there, live and in person.
Yeah, I'm with that for sure. I love brandishing the skills whenever I can.
That'd be fun. It'd be tasty too, I think.
Yeah, I will. You can hold that to me. It is going to taste good.
Chris, appreciate it. Appreciate your time. Thank you for everything, and we'll keep it coming.
Absolutely. Anytime.
Take care. Thank you for watching this episode of Title Unboxed. If you're anything like me, you can never get too much boxing. So if you'd like to watch more episodes, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and our Title Boxing YouTube page.